Picture this. The roar of 50,000 screaming Romans shakes the very foundations of the Colosseum. Two gladiators circle each other in the blood-soaked sand, their weapons glinting in the Mediterranean sun. One stumbles, falls to his knees. The crowd erupts. The emperor rises from his seat. Everyone knows what happens next, right? The thumbs down. The final thrust. Another gladiator dead in the arena. Another body dragged through the gate of death. Except, that's not what actually happened. What if I told you that almost everything you think you know about gladiatorial combat is wrong? What if the movies lied to you? What if the truth about Roman gladiators is somehow even more fascinating, more complex, and more human than the blood-soaked fiction we've been fed for decades? Let's rewind for a second. When you think of gladiators, you probably imagined expendable slaves thrown into an arena to kill each other for the amusement of sadistic Romans. Every fight ends with someone dying, right? The victor stands over his opponent, looks to the crowd, and waits for that infamous thumbs down before delivering the killing blow. It's dramatic. It's violent. It's absolutely riveting cinema. It's also mostly fantasy. The reality of gladiatorial combat was far more nuanced, far more expensive, and surprisingly, far less lethal than popular culture would have you believe. And understanding why this myth exists tells us something profound about how we view ancient Rome, how we consume historical entertainment, and what we're really looking for when we peer back into the past. So why do we believe gladiators always fought to the death? Where did this idea come from? And more importantly, what was really happening in those ancient arenas? The myth of the deathmatch gladiator is deeply embedded in our cultural consciousness. From Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus to Ridley Scott's Gladiator, from Russell Crowe's Are You Not Entertained? To every Sordano epic ever made, we see the same narrative. Gladiators were disposable killing machines, and the arena was nothing more than an ancient slaughterhouse dressed up as entertainment. But here's the thing about gladiators that completely destroys this narrative. They were incredibly expensive. Think about it from a business perspective for a moment. Training a gladiator wasn't like teaching someone to swing a sword for an afternoon. These men spent years in specialized schools called ludi, under the supervision of professional trainers called laneste. They learned specific fighting styles, mastered particular weapons, built up their bodies, and developed the showmanship that would make them crowd favorites. This wasn't a weekend workshop. This was an investment. A quality gladiator could cost the equivalent of several years' wages for an average Roman worker. Some sources suggest that a well-trained gladiator might be worth as much as a luxury villa. These weren't expendable slaves you could just throw away. They were valuable assets, professional athletes, and in many cases, legitimate celebrities. Now, imagine you're a lanista, the owner and trainer of gladiators. You've spent years and a fortune training a particular fighter. He's developed a following. People come to the game specifically to see him fight. He's your star performer, your cash cow. Would you really want him to die in every single fight? Would that make any business sense whatsoever? Of course not. You'd want him to fight, to put on a spectacular show, to thrill the crowd, and then to survive so he could do it all again next month. And that's exactly what happened in the vast majority of gladiatorial contests. Modern archaeological evidence and historical research have completely transformed our understanding of gladiatorial mortality rates. Scholars who've studied the surviving records, tombstones, and graffiti from ancient Rome have found something remarkable. The death rate in gladiatorial combat was somewhere between 10 and 20%. Let that sink in. In any given gladiatorial bout, there was roughly an 80 to 90% chance that both fighters would walk out of the arena alive. This isn't to say gladiatorial combat was safe. It absolutely wasn't. But it wasn't the guaranteed death sentence we imagine. In fact, some gladiators had long, successful careers, spanning dozens or even hundreds of fights. There are records of gladiators who fought 50, 60, even 70 times. One inscription mentions a gladiator who fought 34 times. 121, had 9 draws, and lost 4 times. He survived all of it, and eventually won his freedom. But wait, you might be thinking, what about all those movies? What about the historical accounts of brutal violence? Weren't Romans obsessed with death and bloodshed? Yes and no. Romans definitely enjoyed violence as entertainment. They weren't squeamish about blood, but they also appreciated skill, technique, and artistry in combat. A gladiatorial match wasn't just about death. It was about performance, bravery, and spectacle. Think of it less like a snuff film and more like professional boxing or MMA fighting. Yes, people occasionally die in these sports. Yes, they're violent, but the goal isn't death. It's victory, skill, demonstration, and entertainment. Fighters are trained to hurt their opponents, to dominate them, to win decisively, but not necessarily to kill them. The Romans viewed gladiatorial combat through a similar lens. Different types of gladiatorial matches had different purposes and different levels of lethality. Some fights were specifically designated as sine missioni, meaning without release or to the death. These were special, promoted events where death was expected and promised. They were the exception, not the rule, precisely because they were considered exceptional enough to advertise. The standard gladiatorial bout, on the other hand, would continue until one fighter was clearly defeated. This could happen through submission, through injury serious enough to prevent continuation, or through sheer exhaustion. At this point, the defeated gladiator could appeal for mercy, typically by raising a finger, and the decision would be made whether to spare him or execute him. And here's where we need to address another massive misconception: the thumbs down gesture. We've all seen it. The emperor stands, extends his arm, and points his thumb down. Death. Thumb up means life. It's iconic. It's dramatic. It's in every movie. It's also completely wrong. The Latin phrase pullis averso appears in historical texts, which literally means with turned thumb. But we have no definitive evidence about which direction the thumb turned for death versus mercy. Some scholars think thumbs up might have actually meant death, symbolizing the upward thrust of a sword. Others think a concealed thumb in a closed fist meant mercy, while an extended thumb in any direction meant death. The truth is, we simply don't know for certain what the gesture was. The thumbs down imagery we're familiar with comes from an 1872 painting by Jean Leon Gérôme called Pullis Verso. This French academic painter imagined the scene, made it dramatic, and created an image so powerful that it became the definitive version in popular imagination. Hollywood ran with it, and now we can't imagine it any other way. That's the power of art over historical accuracy. But let's get back to the economics and logistics of gladiatorial combat, because this is where the story gets really interesting. Gladiatorial games were phenomenally expensive to produce. A wealthy Roman putting on games, whether it was a politician seeking popularity or an emperor celebrating a victory, had to pay for everything. The venue, rental, or construction, the wild animals, the condemned criminals for executions, the gladiators, the staff, the refreshments for the crowd, everything. It was a massive financial undertaking, often bankrupting individuals or requiring state resources. Given these costs, it made zero sense to constantly kill off your most expensive performers. Gladiators were rented out by laniste for specific events. If your rented gladiator died, you owed the lanista compensation for the full value of that fighter. This could be astronomical. Some contracts specified that if a gladiator died in combat, the person hosting the games would have to pay the equivalent of 50 times the rental fee. Imagine renting a Ferrari for a track day and being told that if you crash it and total it, you owe 50 Ferraris. You'd drive pretty carefully, wouldn't you? You'd want excitement and performance, but you'd also want that car to survive the day. Roman game sponsors felt the same way about gladiators. This financial structure created a fascinating dynamic. Sponsors wanted exciting fights, but not necessarily deaths. Laniste wanted their fighters to perform well, but survive. Gladiators themselves wanted to win, but also to live to fight another day. Even the crowd, while they certainly enjoyed violence, also developed favorite fighters they wanted to see again and again. Which brings us to another crucial point. Gladiators were celebrities. We have graffiti from Pompeii, calling certain gladiators the heartthrob of all the girls or the pride of the people. Women wrote love notes about them. Children idolized them. People bought merchandise with their names and images. Successful gladiators could become wealthy, famous, and influential. Some were invited to dinner parties with the elite. Some had affairs with noble women. Some became so popular that they were considered more valuable alive than dead. There's a famous story about the Emperor Tiberius, who offered an absurd sum of money to a lanista, just to have a retired gladiator come out of retirement for one more fight. The lanista refused because the gladiator had won his freedom and couldn't be compelled to fight. That's how valuable these men were. Of course, gladiators weren't all volunteers living the dream. Many were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals who had no choice in their profession. Their lives were hard, brutal, and short compared to free Romans. But even these men had a path to survival and potentially freedom that's often overlooked. Gladiators could win their freedom through exceptional performance, after a certain number of victories, or through a particularly impressive display of courage and skill. A gladiator could be awarded the rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing his freedom from the arena. Some freed gladiators stayed in the profession as trainers or continued fighting as free men for the substantial prize money. Others left the arena entirely to pursue different lives.